What if I told you that breaking someone's glasses could expose every dirty secret you've ever tried to hide? This is exactly what happened at Riverside High School, when three bullies thought they could humiliate the quiet kid in the corner. They had no idea they were about to unleash something that would turn their entire world upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Chen had always been invisible at Riverside High. While other students gathered in loud clusters during lunch, he sat alone in the library's back corner, surrounded by towers of textbooks and worn paperbacks. His thick-rimmed glasses constantly slipped down his nose as he absorbed page after page of information with an intensity that made other students uncomfortable. The thing about Marcus that nobody knew was that he never forgot anything. Not the license plate of the car that cut him off 3 months ago. Not the exact words his third-grade teacher used when she praised his essay. Not even the pattern of cracks in the sidewalk he walked every morning. His mind was like a high-definition camera that never stopped recording, capturing every detail of the world around him and filing it away perfectly. This gift, or curse depending on how you looked at it, had made school both easier and harder. For Marcus, easier because he aced every test without studying, harder because he remembered every cruel comment, every sideways glance, every moment of rejection with crystal clarity. While other kids could let harsh words fade into fuzzy memories, Marcus carried them with sharp, painful precision. The three students who would soon change everything had been circling Marcus like predators for weeks. There was Jake Morrison, the quarterback with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that could charm teachers, but hid something darker underneath. His father owned half the commercial real estate in town, and Jake never let anyone forget it. Then there was Tyler Brooks, Jake's right-hand man, whose family had moved to Riverside after some kind of scandal in their previous town. Tyler's family had moved to Riverside after some kind of scandal in their previous town. The kind of person who laughed too loud at Jake's jokes and always seemed to be compensating for something. Finally, there was Derek Walsh, the quiet follower who went along with anything Jake suggested, desperate to maintain his position in their toxic hierarchy. Marcus had been watching them without realizing it, his photographic memory automatically cataloging their behaviors, conversations, and patterns. During lunch periods, he'd observed Jake slipping answer sheets from his backpack during supposedly closed book tests. He'd seen Tyler's hands shake slightly every morning until he took mysterious pills from an unmarked bottle. He'd noticed Derek's expensive designer clothes that seemed odd for someone whose mother worked double shifts at the local diner, but Marcus wasn't the type to gossip or cause trouble. He kept his observations to himself, focusing instead on his books and his plans to escape Riverside after graduation. He dreamed of studying computer science at MIT, far away from the suffocating dynamics of high school social hierarchies. The harassment had started small. Jake would bump into Marcus in the hallway, apologizing with fake sincerity while his friends snickered. Tyler would ask Marcus loudly about his weekend plans, knowing full well he didn't have any, then make exaggerated sad faces when Marcus mumbled responses. Derek would accidentally knock Marcus's books from his desk, then help pick them up. While making comments about how heavy they were, Marcus's routine was predictable, and the three bullies had studied it like a military operation. Every morning at 7:45, he'd arrive at school through the east entrance, stopping at his locker to exchange books before heading to the library. He'd eat lunch alone at the same table, always facing the window so he could watch the courtyard. After school, he'd wait exactly 15 minutes for the initial rush of students to clear, before walking home via the quiet, residential streets. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning in late October. Marcus had been carrying his usual stack of books when he noticed Jake, Tyler, and Derek positioned strategically along his path to the library. Something felt different about their postures, more predatory than usual. His photographic memory instantly recalled similar formations from nature documentaries about pack hunters. Jake stepped forward first, his usual charming smile replaced by something colder. "Hey Marcus, I've been wondering something." His voice carried across the nearly empty hallway. "Are you actually smart? Or do you just memorize everything like some kind of robot?" Marcus tried to step around them, but Tyler moved to block his path. "Jake asked you a question, dude. Don't be rude." "I just want to get to the library," Marcus said quietly, adjusting his glasses nervously. The weight of his book suddenly felt heavier. "See, that's the thing," Jake continued, moving closer. "I think you're not actually smart at all. I think you're just good at copying and memorizing, like a trained monkey. Isn't that right, guys?" Derek laughed on cue, though it sounded forced. "Yeah, maybe we should test if he's actually smart or just has good eyes." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. His photographic memory was already recording every detail of this encounter, from the way Jake's left eye twitched when he lied to the nervous energy radiating from Derek's fidgeting hands. But knowing what was coming didn't make it any easier to stop. "You know what?" Jake said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I bet if we took away those thick glasses, you'd be completely helpless. Just another useless nerd who can't function in the real world." Before Marcus could react, Jake reached out and snatched the glasses from his face. The world immediately became a blur of colors and shapes, but Marcus's other senses sharpened to compensate. He could hear Tyler's excited breathing, Derek's uncomfortable shuffle, and Jake's satisfied chuckle. "Give them back," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Please." "What's the magic word?" Jake taunted, holding the glasses high above Marcus's head. "Oh wait, you already said please. I guess that's not magic enough." Tyler grabbed Marcus's arm as he reached for his glasses. "Come on, Jake, let's see how well our little genius can navigate without his crutches." What happened next would change everything. As Jake held the glasses higher, examining them with mock scientific interest, Derek bumped into him from behind. Whether it was intentional or accidental would later be debated, but the result was immediate. The glasses slipped from Jake's grip and crashed to the floor, one lens shattering completely while the frame bent at an impossible angle. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Marcus dropped to his knees, frantically feeling around for the pieces, his hands shaking as he realized the extent of the damage. Without his glasses, he couldn't even see clearly enough to assess what could be salvaged. "Oops," Jake said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Looks like someone's having a bad day. Maybe you should be more careful with your things." The three bullies walked away, their laughter fading down the hallway, leaving Marcus alone with the broken remains of his vision correction and something much more dangerous. A crystal clear memory of everything he'd ever seen them do when they thought no one was watching. As Marcus carefully gathered the glass fragments, his mind was already working, sorting through months of accumulated observations with perfect clarity. He couldn't see the pieces of his glasses, but he could see everything else with devastating precision. Every secret conversation, every questionable action, every moment of weakness they displayed when they thought they were unobserved. Quiet kid in the corner had just become the most dangerous person in the school, and Jake, Tyler, and Derek had no idea what they'd unleashed. The school nurse, Mrs. Patterson, had seen her share of accidents over the years, but something about Marcus Chun's situation struck her as different. He sat in her office 20 minutes after the incident, squinting at forms she'd handed him while explaining that his backup glasses were at home. What caught her attention wasn't the broken frames in his hands, but the way he answered her questions with unsettling precision. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The collision occurred at exactly 7:52 a.m., Marcus said, his voice flat and mechanical. Jake Morrison was holding my glasses 73 inches from the ground when Derek Walsh made contact with his left shoulder, causing the displacement. Mrs. Patterson paused her note-taking. Most students would say something like, "Some kid broke my glasses." But Marcus spoke like he was reading from a police report. She made a mental note to check if he'd suffered any kind of head trauma. After calling his mother to bring replacement glasses, Marcus spent the rest of the morning in the nurse's office, officially excused from classes due to his vision impairment. But his mind wasn't impaired at all. If anything, the forced stillness allowed him to organize the massive database of information he'd been unconsciously collecting about his tormentors. Jake Morrison. Star quarterback, 4.2 GPA, college scouts already calling. But Marcus remembered October 3rd, during Ms. Rodriguez's chemistry test, when Jake had positioned his phone between his textbook pages, occasionally glancing down at what were clearly photographed answer sheets. Then there was October 15th, when Jake had cornered freshman Tommy Nguyen behind the gym, not for lunch money, but for Tommy's completed calculus homework. Jake had been buying assignments from younger students for months, paying just enough to ensure their silence. The most damaging memory involved October 22nd, when Marcus had been studying late in the library. Through the windows, he'd seen Jake's BMW in the teacher's parking lot at 9:30 p.m., long after any legitimate school activity. Marcus had watched Jake emerge from the building with a box of what looked like fundraising money from the athletic department's candy sale money that was supposed to be deposited the next morning but had mysteriously come up $300 short. Tyler Brooks presented a different kind of puzzle. Marcus had noticed Tyler's morning ritual of taking unmarked pills from a small bottle, but it was the context that made it significant. Tyler's hands would shake until he took the medication, and his behavior would shift dramatically afterward. The pills weren't for anxiety or ADHD. Marcus had observed Tyler selling identical pills to other students during lunch periods for $20 each. The breakthrough came when Marcus recalled a conversation he'd overheard between Tyler and his older brother Craig during a parent-teacher conference. Craig had been bragging about his new job at a pharmaceutical company, specifically about the sample medications he could access. Tyler had been redistributing prescription stimulants to students during exam periods, turning test season into a profitable drug operation. Derek Walsh's secrets were perhaps the most heartbreaking. Marcus had always wondered how Derek afforded designer clothes and expensive electronics on a single mother's diner wages. The answer came through a series of seemingly unrelated observations. Derek's frequent trips to the parking lot during lunch, his nervous behavior around certain teachers, and the way he'd flinch whenever anyone mentioned his father. The truth was that Derek had been selling stolen goods on behalf of his father, who was supposedly out of the picture but was actually using Derek as a front for his fencing operation. The expensive items Derek wore were either stolen merchandise or purchased with stolen money. Marcus had even seen Derek's father drop off boxes of electronics in the school parking lot, using his son as a middleman to avoid suspicion. When Marcus's mother arrived with his backup glasses, he was ready to see the world clearly again, in more ways than one. The replacement frames were older and less comfortable, but they restored his vision just as the final pieces of his mental puzzle clicked into place. The remainder of the school day passed in a strange haze. Marcus attended his afternoon classes, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating and planning. His three tormentors had unknowingly handed him enough ammunition to destroy their lives, and the temptation to use it was overwhelming. During sixth period history class, Marcus found himself studying Jake's profile as he sat 3 rows ahead. Jake was texting someone under his desk, probably coordinating another academic fraud scheme or planning his next fundraising theft. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Jake's entire future depended on maintaining his image as a model student and athlete, yet he was systematically undermining the very institutions that supported him. Tyler sat in the back corner, his earlier Nervous energy now replaced by the artificial confidence his stolen medication provided. He'd built a reputation as the guy who could help students perform better during exams, but he was essentially running a drug operation out of his locker. The pharmaceutical theft could result in federal charges, especially given the volume Marcus had observed over the past month. Derek was the wild card. Unlike Jake and Tyler, who seemed to thrive on their illegal activities, Derek appeared genuinely tormented by his situation. Marcus had noticed Derek's grades declining, his participation in class discussions dropping, and his overall demeanor becoming increasingly withdrawn. The pressure of serving as his father's criminal intermediary was clearly taking its toll. As the final bell rang, Marcus made a decision that would set everything in motion. Instead of heading directly home as usual, he took a detour to the computer lab. The school's ancient desktop computers were still logged into the network, and Marcus had legitimate access as a member of the programming club. He spent the next hour carefully documenting everything he'd observed, creating detailed timelines, and cross-referencing his memories with publicly available information. He verified Jake's test scores against his actual performance patterns, confirmed Tyler's pill-selling schedule against exam periods, and traced Derek's expensive purchases to suspicious timing patterns. The documentation was meticulous, almost clinical in its precision. Marcus included specific dates, times, locations, and observable behaviors. He created a comprehensive file that read like a professional investigation report, complete with behavioral analysis and predictive modeling for future activities. Marcus wasn't planning to turn this information over to authorities, not yet. He had a different strategy in mind, one that would give his tormentors a chance to experience the same helplessness they'd inflicted on him. As he saved his work to a secure folder and prepared to leave the computer lab, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before: power. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the victim of other people's actions. He was the one holding all the cards, and tomorrow he would begin to play them. Marcus arrived at school the next morning with a different energy entirely. Where yesterday he'd shuffled through the hallways trying to remain invisible, today he walked with purpose. His backup glasses might have been less comfortable, but they provided perfect clarity for what he was about to do. The first phase of his plan was simple: establish contact. Marcus had spent the previous evening crafting 3 separate messages, each tailored specifically to its recipient's psychology and vulnerabilities. He wasn't going to confront them directly, that would be too predictable, and give them time to coordinate a response. During first period English class, Marcus slipped a folded piece of paper onto Jake's desk while passing by to sharpen his pencil. Jake initially ignored it, probably assuming it was some kind of homework question from a desperate classmate. But when he finally unfolded it during a particularly boring discussion about symbolism in The Great Gatsby, his entire demeanor changed. The note was brief: Athletic Department fundraiser money. October 22nd, 9:30 p.m. We need to talk. A concerned observer. Marcus watched Jake's face drain of color as he read the message. Jake's eyes darted around the classroom, searching for who might have left it, but Marcus had already returned to his seat and was dutifully taking notes. Jake crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket, but Marcus could see his hands trembling slightly. The second message found its way to Tyler during lunch period. Marcus had observed Tyler's routine of eating alone in the east stairwell, away from the main cafeteria crowd. It was the perfect location for someone trying to avoid attention while conducting business, and Tyler had been using it as his primary distribution point for stolen pharmaceuticals. Tyler's note was more direct. Craig's sample medications. $20 per pill. Exam schedules. Federal offense. Library, 3:15 p.m. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Tyler actually dropped his sandwich, and Marcus watched him frantically look around the empty stairwell as if expecting federal agents to emerge from the shadows. Tyler pulled out his phone and appeared to be texting someone urgently, probably his brother Craig, trying to figure out if their operation had been compromised. Derek's message was the most carefully crafted because Marcus understood that Derek was the most psychologically fragile of the three. Rather than threaten him directly, Marcus appealed to what he'd observed was Derek's genuine desire to escape his situation. The note simply read, "Your father's boxes. Parking lot transactions. There's a way out. Meet me after school, east entrance." Marcus had positioned himself where he could observe Derek's reaction when he found the message in his locker. Unlike Jake's fear or Tyler's panic, Derek's response was almost relief. Marcus saw Derek's shoulders relax slightly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for months. The rest of the school day passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of psychological warfare. Marcus attended his classes normally, but he could feel the three bullies' eyes on him whenever they crossed paths in the hallways. They were trying to figure out if he was their anonymous correspondent, but Marcus gave them nothing. No meaningful glances, no satisfied smirks, no deviation from his usual quiet demeanor. During fourth period chemistry, Marcus noticed Jake trying to position himself closer to Marcus's lab station, probably hoping to overhear some kind of incriminating conversation. But Marcus simply focused on his titration experiment, methodically recording measurements while Jake grew increasingly agitated nearby. Tyler's paranoia reached new heights during lunch. Instead of his usual stairwell location, he'd moved to the library's computer section, constantly checking over his shoulder and jumping at every small sound. Marcus observed him checking his phone obsessively, probably coordinating with his brother about damage control. Derek was the most interesting to watch. Rather than showing fear or panic, he seemed to be preparing for something. Marcus saw him cleaning out his locker more thoroughly than usual and noticed he'd left his expensive watch and designer jacket at home. It was as if Derek was already mentally separating himself from his father's criminal enterprise. At 3:15 p.m., Marcus made his way to the library for his scheduled meeting with Tyler. He chose a table in the back corner, surrounded by tall shelves that would provide privacy while still being in a public space. Tyler arrived exactly on time, his usual confident swagger replaced by nervous energy. "You're the one who's been watching me," Tyler said, sliding into the chair across from Marcus. It wasn't a question. "I watch everyone," Marcus replied calmly. "It's just that most people aren't doing anything interesting enough to remember." Tyler leaned forward, trying to intimidate through proximity. "What do you want, money?" "Because whatever you think you saw, I saw everything," Marcus interrupted, his voice steady and factual. "Craig delivers sample medications every Tuesday and Friday. You redistribute them during exam periods. Average profit per test session is $400. You've been operating for 6 weeks. The specificity of the information hit Tyler like a physical blow. He slumped back in his chair, the fight going out of him immediately. "How could you possibly know all that?" "Because I remember everything I see," Marcus said simply. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Tyler's bravado crumbled completely. "What do you want from me?" Marcus had prepared for this moment. "I want you to understand what it feels like to be powerless. To have someone hold your future in their hands and know there's nothing you can do about it. Are you going to turn me in? That depends entirely on you." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Marcus carefully outlining Tyler's options while never explicitly threatening him. He didn't need to threaten, the facts spoke for themselves. Tyler left the library looking like he'd aged several years in the span of their brief conversation. Derek was waiting by the east entrance when Marcus arrived, just as requested. Unlike Tyler's confrontational approach, Derek seemed almost grateful to finally talk to someone who knew the truth about his situation. "I can't keep doing this," Derek said before Marcus could even speak. "My mom thinks I got a part-time job. She's so proud of me for contributing to the family finances. If she knew where the money was really coming from. Marcus studied Derek's face, seeing genuine remorse and desperation. Your father's using you as a front because minors get lighter sentences for theft charges. Derek nodded miserably. He says it's temporary, just until he gets back on his feet. But it's been 8 months, and the stuff he's asking me to move is getting more expensive. I think he's escalating. What kind of escalation? Electronics, jewelry, even some car parts. He's got me meeting with buyers at school because he thinks it's safer here. But I'm terrified someone's going to figure out what's happening. Marcus felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Unlike Jake and Tyler, who had chosen their criminal paths, Derek was being manipulated by a parent who should have been protecting him. There is a way out, Marcus said carefully. But it requires you to be brave in a different way than you've been. Derek looked up with hope in his eyes for the first time in months. What do you mean? Anonymous tip to the police. Your father gets arrested for fencing stolen goods. You become a witness instead of an accomplice. Your mother gets the truth, but she also gets protection from social services. The suggestion hung in the air between them as Derek processed the implications. Marcus could see him weighing his fear of his father against his desire to escape. The increasingly dangerous situation. Would you help me? Derek asked quietly. I don't know how to do something like that without making it worse. Marcus nodded. I'll help you. But first, we need to deal with your friends Jake and Tyler. They're about to have much bigger problems than broken glasses. As Derek walked away, Marcus felt the final piece of his plan clicking into place. Tomorrow, Jake Morrison would learn that his carefully constructed image was about to crumble, and all 3 bullies would understand that actions have consequences, especially when someone with a perfect memory is watching. Jake Morrison didn't sleep well that night. He'd spent hours staring at his ceiling, trying to figure out who could possibly know about the fundraising money incident. He'd been so careful, waiting until the building was empty, using his father's connections to get the security codes. The $300 had been meant to cover his gambling debts from the underground poker games he'd been attending downtown, debts that were accumulating interest at an alarming rate. The next morning, Jake arrived at school early, hoping to intercept Marcus before classes started. He found Marcus in his usual spot in the library, reading what appeared to be an advanced calculus textbook. Jake approached with his characteristic confidence, but Marcus could see the tension in his shoulders. We need to talk, Jake said, sliding into the chair across from Marcus without invitation. Marcus looked up from his book with mild interest. About what? Don't play dumb. You left me that note yesterday. I leave notes for many people. You'll have to be more specific. Jake's jaw clenched. This wasn't how these conversations usually went. People were supposed to be intimidated by him, not calmly reading textbooks while he struggled to maintain control. The athletic department money, Jake said through gritted teeth. What you think you saw? I don't think anything, Marcus interrupted, closing his book with deliberate precision. I saw you enter the building at 9:27 p.m. using the east entrance. You disabled the alarm system at 9:31 p.m., probably with codes provided by your father's security company. You spent 12 minutes in the athletic office and left with a gray lockbox containing approximately $847 in fundraising proceeds. Jake's face went pale. The level of detail was impossible unless someone had been watching him directly, but he'd been certain the building was empty. You took exactly $300 leaving $547 to avoid immediate detection. The missing money wasn't discovered until the next afternoon, and Coach Peterson assumed it was a clerical error since the amount was relatively small. How could you possibly know all that? Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. The same way I know about your test answers, your homework purchases, and your Tuesday night poker games at the warehouse on 5th Street. Jake's world tilted. The poker games were supposed to be completely secret, known only to a select group of participants. His father would disown him if he found out Jake was gambling with borrowed money and using school resources to pay his debts. "What do you want?" Jake asked, his usual bravado completely gone. Marcus studied Jake's face with clinical interest. "I want you to understand what it feels like to be afraid. To know that someone has the power to destroy everything you've worked for. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. For the past 3 years, you've made school a miserable experience for dozens of students. You've used your father's influence and your athletic status to avoid consequences for your behavior. But now you're going to learn that actions have consequences, even for people like you." Jake's mind raced, trying to find an angle, some way to regain control. "My father has lawyers. If you try to blackmail me—" "This isn't blackmail," Marcus said calmly. "Blackmail implies I want something from you. I don't want your money or your friendship or your silence. I want justice." Before Jake could respond, Marcus stood and gathered his books. "You have 48 hours to confess to Coach Peterson about the stolen money. If you don't, I'll provide him with a detailed timeline of your activities, including photographic evidence of your poker game participation." "You don't have photographs, don't I?" Marcus asked, adjusting his glasses. "I remember everything, Jake. Every detail, every conversation, every moment when you thought no one was watching. The question is, how much of your life are you willing to have exposed?" Jake watched Marcus walk away, feeling utterly powerless for the first time in his life. The roles had completely reversed. He was now the one afraid of what might happen next. Meanwhile, Tyler had spent the morning trying to contact his brother Craig, but Craig wasn't answering his calls. Tyler's paranoia had reached critical levels, and he'd already flushed his remaining pill inventory down the toilet, losing nearly $500 in potential profits. The withdrawal from his own medication was making him jittery and unfocused. During second period biology, Tyler's hands shook so badly he couldn't hold his pencil steady. His lab partner, Sarah Kim, noticed his distress and offered to help with their dissection assignment, but Tyler was too agitated to accept assistance. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, genuinely concerned. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Tyler wanted to confide in someone, but the weight of his situation felt crushing. How could he explain that he'd been running a prescription drug operation out of his locker? That his brother had been stealing medication samples from his pharmaceutical job? That they were probably looking at federal charges if anyone discovered the truth? The irony wasn't lost on him that Marcus Chun, the quiet kid he'd helped torment just days earlier, now held the power to destroy his entire future. Tyler's college applications were already submitted, his acceptance letters starting to arrive. Everything he'd worked for could disappear with a single phone call to the authorities. Derek, on the other hand, was experiencing something he hadn't felt in months: hope. Marcus's offer to help him escape his father's criminal enterprise felt like a lifeline, but Derek knew the process wouldn't be simple. His father had spent years building a network of contacts and establishing Derek as a trusted intermediary. Breaking free would require careful planning and considerable courage. During lunch, Derek made a decision that would change everything. Instead of meeting his father's contact in the parking lot as scheduled, he went to the guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Thompson had always been kind to him, and Derek desperately needed to talk to an adult who might understand his situation. "I need help," Derek said, sitting across from Mrs. Thompson's desk. "I'm in a situation that's gotten out of control, and I don't know how to fix it." Mrs. Thompson set aside her paperwork and gave Derek her full attention. "What kind of situation?" Derek took a deep breath. "My father is making me do things that aren't legal. I've been trying to protect my mother by going along with it, but I think I'm just making everything worse." "What kind of illegal activities?" "Selling things that don't belong to us. Meeting with people who buy stolen goods." Using me as a go-between because I'm a minor and the penalties are lighter. Mrs. Thompson's expression grew serious. How long has this been going on? 8 months, maybe longer. I've lost track. Derek, what you're describing is a form of child abuse. Your father is putting you in danger and using you to commit crimes. This isn't your fault, and you don't have to handle it alone. For the first time in months, Derek felt tears coming. I don't know what to do. If I turn him in, my mother will lose the money we've been using for rent and groceries. But if I keep helping him, I'm going to end up in juvenile detention, or worse. We're going to figure this out together, Mrs. Thompson said firmly. But first, I need you to promise me you won't meet with any more of these contacts. Can you do that? Derek nodded, feeling a weight lifting from his shoulders. There's someone else who's been helping me think through this. A classmate noticed what was happening and offered to help me find a way out. What's this classmate's name? Marcus Chun. He's in my grade, really smart. He figured out what my father was making me do and said he'd help me report it safely. Mrs. Thompson made a note. I'd like to talk to Marcus as well, if that's okay with you. It sounds like he might have valuable insights about how to handle the situation. As Derek left the guidance office, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. The possibility of a normal life. Marcus had been right. There was a way out, but it required being brave in a completely different way than he'd been before. The domino effect was beginning. Jake was panicking about his stolen money and gambling debts. Tyler was spiraling without his medication supply and terrified of federal investigation. Derek was finally seeking help from adults who could protect him, and Marcus Chen, the quiet kid with broken glasses, was orchestrating it all with the precision of a chess master who could see 20 moves ahead. The game was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted permanently. The 48-hour deadline Marcus had given Jake was approaching fast, and the pressure was showing. Jake's usual swagger had been replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that his teammates were beginning to notice. During football practice, he'd fumbled 3 easy catches and missed 2 crucial blocking assignments, earning him a sharp reprimand from Coach Peterson. Morrison, what's gotten into you? Coach Peterson barked after Jake had allowed a defensive tackle to breeze past him for the 3rd time. Your head's somewhere else entirely. You're playing like you've never seen a football before. Jake mumbled an apology and tried to refocus, but his mind kept returning to Marcus's ultimatum. The stolen money seemed like such a small problem compared to his mounting gambling debts, but he knew that admitting to theft would trigger a cascade of investigations that would expose everything else. His phone buzzed with another text from Vince Carlucci, the man who ran the poker games. Payment due Friday. No extensions. You know the consequences. Jake did know the consequences. 2 weeks earlier, he'd watched Vince's associates break Tommy Rodriguez's fingers for missing a payment. Tommy had been forced to drop out of school and move back to Mexico to avoid further retaliation. Jake's debts were now approaching $3,000, and the interest was compounding daily. Meanwhile, Tyler's situation was spiraling beyond his control. His brother Craig had finally returned his calls, but the conversation had been devastating. The pharmaceutical company had conducted an unexpected inventory audit and discovered significant discrepancies in their sample medication supplies. Craig was under investigation and had been suspended pending the outcome of an internal review. They're going to find out about you, Craig had whispered during their panicked phone conversation. They're tracking every sample that went missing, and they have security footage of me taking extra inventory. It's only a matter of time before they connect it to the school. Tyler had hung up feeling sick to his stomach. Without his morning medication, his anxiety was spiking to unmanageable levels. He'd barely been able to concentrate during his classes, and his teachers were starting to notice his erratic behavior. During 4th period chemistry, Tyler's hands were shaking so badly that he knocked over a beaker of hydrochloric acid, requiring an emergency cleanup and evacuation of the lab. Ms. Rodriguez pulled him aside afterward, expressing concern about his obvious distress. "Tyler, I've noticed some changes in your behavior lately. Are you dealing with something at home? Is there anything I can do to help?" Tyler wanted desperately to confide in someone, but admitting to drug distribution would mean immediate expulsion and criminal charges. Instead, he made an excuse about college application stress and promised to see the school counselor. Derek's situation was evolving more positively. Mrs. Thompson had arranged for him to meet with Detective Maria Santos from the local police department's juvenile division. Detective Santos specialized in cases involving minors who had been coerced into criminal activity by family members. "What your father is doing is called criminal exploitation of a minor," Detective Santos explained during their confidential meeting. "It's a serious felony, and the law recognizes that children in your situation are victims, not criminals." Derek felt a mix of relief and terror. "What happens to my mom if my dad gets arrested?" "We've been using the money he gives me for basic expenses. There are victim assistance programs that can help with temporary financial support," Detective Santos assured him. "Your mother can also apply for emergency public assistance while she gets back on her feet. The important thing is getting you out of this dangerous situation." Detective Santos outlined a plan that would involve Derek wearing a recording device during his next meeting with one of his father's contacts. The recorded transaction would provide the evidence needed to arrest his father and dismantle the fencing operation. "I need you to understand that this is completely voluntary," Detective Santos emphasized. "You're not required to help with the investigation, but if you choose to cooperate, we can offer you and your mother protection from retaliation." Derek agreed without hesitation. The prospect of finally being free from his father's criminal enterprise was worth any risk involved. As Thursday afternoon arrived, Marcus found himself at the center of 3 simultaneous crises. He'd been monitoring all 3 situations carefully, and it was time to apply the final pressure that would force everything into the open. He started with Jake, intercepting him in the parking lot after football practice. Jake looked exhausted and defeated, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Time's up," Marcus said simply, approaching Jake's BMW. "Have you confessed to Coach Peterson?" Jake's response was immediate and desperate. "I can't do it, man. You don't understand what this will trigger. My gambling debts, my father's reputation, the college scouts, everything will fall apart." "It's already falling apart," Marcus observed. "The question is whether you want to control how it happens or let it destroy you completely. What if I paid back the money? I could replace the $300 without anyone knowing it was ever missing." Marcus shook his head. "That doesn't address the larger issues: the gambling, the academic fraud, the pattern of behavior. Paying back stolen money doesn't erase the theft." Jake's composure finally cracked completely. "Please, I'm begging you. There has to be another way. These people I owe money to, they're not just going to write off my debts. If my father finds out I've been gambling, he'll cut me off completely. I'll have no way to pay them back." For the first time, Marcus felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. But then he remembered the humiliation of his broken glasses, the months of harassment, the way Jake had used his privilege to torment others without consequence. "You should have thought about consequences before you decided to steal and lie and hurt people," Marcus said firmly. "You have until tomorrow morning to confess, or I'll provide Coach Peterson with documentation of everything I've observed." That evening, Marcus received an unexpected visit at home. Mrs. Thompson and Detective Santos had come to discuss Derek's situation and Marcus's role in helping expose the criminal activity. "Derek tells us you've been instrumental in helping him understand his options," Mrs. Thompson said as they sat in Marcus's family's living room. "We wanted to thank you for encouraging him to seek help." Marcus's mother, Dr. Linda Chun, listened with amazement as the adults explained how her son's observational skills had helped identify and address a serious case of child exploitation. "I just noticed patterns," Marcus said modestly. Derek was obviously struggling with something, and it didn't seem fair that he had to handle it alone. Detective Santos leaned forward. "Your ability to notice and remember details could be incredibly valuable in helping other students who might be in similar situations. Have you observed any other concerning patterns of behavior at school?" Marcus thought carefully before responding. He could mention Tyler's drug distribution operation, but Tyler was also a victim in his own way, manipulated by his older brother and struggling with untreated anxiety. He could expose Jake's theft and gambling, but Jake was already facing an ultimatum and would hopefully do the right thing. "I think the most important thing is making sure students know they can get help when they need it," Marcus said, diplomatically. A lot of problems could be prevented if people felt safe asking for support before situations became desperate. Dr. Chun squeezed her son's shoulder proudly. "Marcus has always been unusually perceptive about people's emotions and behaviors. I'm glad he's using that gift to help his classmates." As the adults prepared to leave, Detective Santos handed Marcus a card. "If you ever notice students in situations where they might be victims of exploitation or abuse, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. Your observations could literally save lives." That night, Marcus lay in bed thinking about how dramatically everything had changed in just a few days. The quiet kid who had always been invisible was now at the center of multiple investigations and interventions. His broken glasses had become the catalyst for exposing corruption, criminal activity, and abuse that had been hidden in plain sight. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontations, and Marcus was ready to see how his carefully orchestrated plan would reach its conclusion. Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Marcus walked through the halls of Riverside High knowing that by the end of the day, nothing would ever be the same. The carefully constructed facades that Jake, Tyler, and Derek had maintained were about to crumble, each in their own devastating way. Jake's deadline had arrived, and Marcus could see the decision etched in every line of the quarterback's face. During the first period, Jake sat motionless at his desk, staring at a blank piece of paper while their English teacher discussed the themes of moral corruption in Macbeth. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on Marcus, who observed Jake's internal struggle with clinical fascination. At exactly 10:15 a.m., during the break between second and third periods, Jake Morrison walked into Coach Peterson's office and closed the door behind him. Marcus didn't need to witness the conversation to know what was happening. Jake's body language, as he'd walked down the hallway, had been that of a man going to his execution. The conversation lasted 18 minutes. When Jake emerged from the office, his face was ashen and his hands were visibly trembling. Coach Peterson followed shortly after, his expression thunderous as he headed directly toward the principal's office. By lunchtime, the news had spread through the school's administrative network like wildfire. Jake Morrison, star quarterback and model student, had confessed to stealing $300 from the athletic department's fundraising money. But that was only the beginning. His confession had opened a floodgate of revelations about academic fraud, gambling debts, and a web of deception that reached far beyond the school's walls. Principal Watkins called an emergency meeting with Jake's parents, who arrived looking bewildered and increasingly horrified as the full scope of their son's activities became clear. Marcus observed the family leaving the school through the main entrance, Jake's father walking with the rigid posture of a man whose world had just collapsed, his mother crying openly, and Jake himself looking smaller and more vulnerable than Marcus had ever seen him. Tyler's downfall came from an unexpected direction. His brother Craig, facing his own federal investigation, had decided to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency. That cooperation included providing detailed information about the prescription drug distribution network he and Tyler had established. At 1:30 p.m., two federal agents arrived at Riverside High with a warrant to search Tyler's locker and question him about his involvement in pharmaceutical theft and distribution. Tyler was pulled out of his geometry class and escorted to an empty conference room where the gravity of his situation became immediately clear. Marcus watched through the hallway windows as Tyler's mother arrived at the school, accompanied by a lawyer she'd hastily contacted. The legal consultation lasted over an hour, and when it concluded, Tyler emerged looking completely broken. The federal charges he was facing included drug trafficking, conspiracy, and possession with intent to distribute, serious felonies that could result in years in prison. Despite his minor status, the most shocking revelation came when agents discovered Tyler's detailed sales records hidden in his bedroom. In his anxiety-driven perfectionism, Tyler had kept meticulous documentation of every transaction, every customer, and every dollar earned. What he'd intended as business records had become a comprehensive confession that implicated dozens of students across 3 different schools. Derek's situation unfolded very differently. Following Detective Santos's plan, he had agreed to wear a recording device during his scheduled meeting with one of his father's contacts. The sting operation took place in the school parking lot during his lunch period. With undercover officers positioned strategically throughout the area, Marcus positioned himself where he could observe the operation without interfering. He watched Derek approach a man in a red pickup truck with a box of what appeared to be expensive electronics. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds, long enough to establish intent to purchase stolen goods and document the illegal transaction. The moment Derek walked away from the truck, unmarked police vehicles converged from 3 directions. The buyer was arrested immediately, while Derek was escorted to a safe location where Detective Santos debriefed him and ensured his psychological well-being. Within 2 hours, Derek's father had been arrested at his apartment, along with 4 other members of his fencing network. The operation Derek had been forced to participate in was far larger than anyone had realized, involving stolen merchandise worth over $50,000 and connections to organized crime elements in neighboring cities. But Derek's courage in coming forward had done more than just end his own nightmare. It had dismantled an entire criminal enterprise and potentially saved other children from being exploited in similar ways. As the school day ended, Marcus found himself in the unusual position of being approached by other students. Word had somehow spread that the quiet kid with the broken glasses had been instrumental in exposing the corruption that had been festering beneath Riverside High's surface. "Is it true you're the one who figured out what Tyler was selling?" asked Jessica Walsh, a junior who had struggled with anxiety and academic pressure. "I just noticed patterns," Marcus replied, uncomfortable with the attention. "Anyone could have seen the same things if they'd been paying attention. But most people don't pay attention like you do," Jessica continued. "My friend Emma said Tyler tried to sell her pills during finals week last semester. She was too scared to report it because she thought no one would believe her." This revelation hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. His focus had been on stopping his tormentors and protecting Derek, but he hadn't fully considered how many other students might have been affected by Tyler's drug operation or intimidated by Jake's behavior. Sarah Chun, no relation despite the shared surname, approached with a different perspective. "I heard Derek's dad was arrested today. Is Derek okay? I've been worried about him for months. He always seemed so stressed and scared of something." Marcus realized that his photographic memory and analytical skills had allowed him to see problems that other students had sensed but couldn't articulate. Jessica had recognized that something was wrong with Tyler's behavior. Sarah had noticed Derek's distress. But none of them had possessed the complete picture or the confidence to take action. The final surprise of the day came during 8th period, when Marcus was called to Principal Watkins's office. He arrived expecting some kind of interrogation about his role in the day's events, but instead found Principal Watkins, Mrs. Thompson, and Detective Santos waiting with expressions of gratitude rather than suspicion. "Marcus," Principal Watkins began, "I want you to know that your actions this week have helped us address serious problems that could have escalated into genuine tragedies. Jake's gambling debts were attracting the attention of some very dangerous people. Tyler's drug distribution was putting vulnerable students at risk. And Derek was being systematically abused by his own father." Detective Santos nodded in agreement. "What you did required remarkable courage and wisdom. You could have used the information you gathered for revenge, but instead you chose to create opportunities for healing and justice." Mrs. Thompson leaned forward. "We'd like to discuss the possibility of you working with our guidance department to help identify other students who might be struggling with similar issues. Your observational skills could help us intervene before situations become desperate." Marcus considered the offer carefully. The events of the past week had shown him that his photographic memory and analytical abilities could be used for something far more meaningful than academic achievement. He could help protect students who were vulnerable, exploited, or afraid. "To ask for help, I'd like that," Marcus said finally. "But I want to make sure that students feel safe coming forward voluntarily. The goal should be helping people, not hunting for problems." As Marcus walked home that afternoon, he reflected on how completely his world had changed. 3 days ago, he'd been the invisible kid whose greatest concern was avoiding bullies. Now he was being recognized as someone who could identify and address serious problems that adults had missed. His broken glasses had been replaced with a new pair that morning, but Marcus realized he didn't need perfect vision to see what really mattered, using his gifts to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. 3 months later, Riverside High School was a fundamentally different place. The events that had begun with a pair of broken glasses had created ripple effects that extended far beyond anyone's initial expectations, transforming not just individual lives, but the entire culture of the institution. Marcus Chun had settled into his new role as a peer advocate with the guidance department, but not in the way anyone had originally envisioned. Rather than actively seeking out problems, he'd become a safe harbor for students who needed someone to listen without judgment. His reputation as the kid who had helped Derek escape his father's criminal network had spread throughout the school, creating an unexpected dynamic where troubled students began approaching him voluntarily. His first major case had come just 2 weeks after the arrests. A freshman named Amanda Torres had approached him during lunch, her hands shaking as she explained that her older boyfriend was pressuring her to shoplift expensive items for him to sell online. Marcus had recognized the pattern immediately, another exploitation scheme targeting a vulnerable minor. Working with Mrs. Thompson and Detective Santos, they'd developed an intervention strategy that protected Amanda while gathering evidence against her boyfriend and his retail theft operation. The case had resulted in 3 arrests and freed Amanda from a relationship that had been escalating toward more serious criminal activity. The success had led to the establishment of what Principal Watkins called the Shen Protocol, a systematic approach to identifying and addressing student exploitation that combined Marcus's observational skills with professional counseling and law enforcement resources. Jake Morrison's trajectory had been the most dramatic. The confession about the stolen athletic fund money had triggered a comprehensive investigation that revealed gambling debts totaling over $4,000, academic fraud spanning 2 years, and connections to underground gambling operations that extended into organized crime territory. The legal consequences had been severe, but not insurmountable. Jake faced felony theft charges, academic probation, and immediate expulsion from the football team. His college recruitment opportunities had evaporated overnight, and his father's security company had lost several major contracts due to the scandal. But something unexpected had emerged from Jake's downfall. stripped of his artificial confidence and social status. He'd been forced to confront the underlying insecurities and family pressures that had driven his destructive behavior. Court-mandated therapy had revealed years of suppressed anxiety about living up to his father's expectations and terror of being seen as weak or vulnerable. Marcus had been surprised when Jake approached him 6 weeks after the arrests. The former quarterback looked different, thinner, more tired, but somehow more genuine than Marcus had ever seen him. "I want to apologize," Jake had said, his voice lacking any trace of his former arrogance. "Not just for breaking your glasses, but for everything. The way I treated you, the way I treated other people. I was so scared of being seen as weak that I turned into something terrible." The conversation had lasted over an hour, with Jake explaining how therapy had helped him understand the cycle of intimidation and fear that had defined his behavior. He'd been bullied by his father's impossible standards and had redirected that trauma toward students he perceived as safer targets. "I know this doesn't fix anything," Jake had concluded, "but I wanted you to know that what you did, holding me accountable, probably saved my life. The gambling debts were escalating, and the people I owed money to were getting more dangerous. If you hadn't forced everything into the open, I probably would have ended up dead or in prison within a year." Jake was now working part-time at a local community center, teaching conflict resolution skills to at-risk youth as part of his community service requirement. The irony of the former bully becoming an advocate against bullying wasn't lost on anyone, but Marcus had observed genuine change in Jake's demeanor and approach to interpersonal relationships. Tyler Brooks had faced the most serious legal consequences. Federal charges for drug trafficking and conspiracy had resulted in a plea agreement that included 18 months in juvenile detention, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. His college applications had been withdrawn, and his future plans had been completely derailed. However, Tyler's case had also exposed significant gaps in the school's mental health support systems. His untreated anxiety disorder and dependence on unprescribed medication had been symptoms of a larger problem affecting dozens of students who were self-medicating rather than seeking proper treatment. The school district had responded by implementing comprehensive mental health screening programs and providing on-site counseling services. Tyler's mother had become an advocate for adolescent mental health awareness, speaking at school board meetings about the warning signs she'd missed and the resources that could have prevented her son's descent into criminal activity. Marcus had received a letter from Tyler during his detention, written in the careful handwriting of someone with too much time to think about their mistakes. The letter had been surprisingly thoughtful, acknowledging the harm Tyler had caused while also expressing gratitude that his self-destructive spiral had been stopped before it could continue. Derek Walsh's transformation had been the most positive of the three. With his father in prison and his mother receiving victim assistance support, Derek had been able to focus on his education for the first time in years. His grades had improved dramatically, and he'd discovered a talent for creative writing that had been suppressed under the stress of his criminal exploitation. Derek had also become involved in the peer advocacy program, using his experience with family-based exploitation to help other students recognize and escape similar situations. His insights had been invaluable in developing protocols for identifying children who were being used as intermediaries in adult criminal enterprises. The most rewarding aspect for Derek had been rebuilding his relationship with his mother. Free from the financial pressure and fear that had defined their lives, they'd been able to address the trauma of his father's abuse and create a healthier family dynamic. Derek's mother had found stable employment with benefits, and they'd moved to a safer neighborhood where Derek could attend school without fear of running into his father's criminal associates. Marcus himself had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The recognition of his unique abilities had led to opportunities beyond the school environment. Detective Santos had introduced him to a FBI behavioral analyst who specialized in pattern recognition, leading to discussions about potential career paths in law enforcement or forensic psychology. More immediately, Marcus had discovered that his photographic memory and analytical skills were most fulfilling when used to help others rather than simply to excel academically. He'd begun tutoring struggling students, using his ability to remember exactly how concepts had been explained to identify more effective teaching approaches for different learning styles. The bullying incident that had started everything felt like ancient history, but its lessons remained relevant. Marcus had learned that being invisible wasn't safe. It missed opportunities to help people who needed support. His broken glasses had been a catalyst for developing courage he hadn't known he possessed. The most significant change at Riverside High was cultural. The exposure of corruption and exploitation had forced the entire community to examine the pressures and dynamics that enabled such behavior. Students were more likely to report concerning situations, teachers were better trained to recognize warning signs, and administrators had implemented systems for addressing problems before they escalated. Marcus's story had become part of the school's orientation program for new students, not as a cautionary tale about bullying, but as an example of how individual courage and observational skills could create positive change in entire communities. As Marcus walked through the halls of Riverside High 6 months after his glasses had been broken, he reflected on how completely his world had changed. He was no longer invisible, but his visibility came from choosing to use his gifts to protect others rather than simply to protect himself. The quiet kid in the corner had become someone who stood up when standing up mattered, and that transformation had helped create a school where fewer students had to suffer in silence. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice wasn't strength or popularity. It was simply the courage to remember everything and refuse to let important truths remain hidden. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.